All right, buckle up, everyone, because today's deep dive takes us into the world of German constitutional law, and let me tell you, things are about to get interesting.
Interesting is an understatement.
Oh, I know, right? But seriously, we're looking at this document that outlines 20 cases where federal laws in Germany were actually, get this, deemed unconstitutional since the year 2000.
Yeah, and we're not talking about some obscure law either.
Oh, absolutely not.
This is stuff like taxes, healthcare, environmental protection.
Even the right to die. It's kind of mind-blowing to think about, right? Like a law the government passed, poof, gone, just like that.
It really makes you think about the power of a constitution.
No kidding. Okay, so before we dive into the specifics of these cases,
Sure.
can you walk us through what actually makes a law unconstitutional in Germany? What's the process like?
Well, it all boils down to their constitution, which they call the Grundgesetz, or GG for short, and the role of their federal constitutional court, the BWRFG.
The BWRFG, got it.
Think of them as the guardians of the GG, the ultimate referees of the German legal system.
So if someone feels like a law is violating their basic rights, they can just go straight to the BWRFG and say, hey, this isn't right.
Pretty much, yeah.
Wow.
Any citizen can file what's called a constitutional complaint.
Okay.
Or even other courts can refer cases up to the BWRFG.
Interesting.
And when the BWRFG makes a decision, it's not just a suggestion. It's binding for everyone. Even the government has to adjust the law to align with the Constitution.
That's some serious power they have.
It is.
No wonder these 20 cases we're looking at are so intriguing.
Definitely.
All right, so let's jump into some of these cases, shall we? What's one that you think might really surprise our listeners? Something they wouldn't expect.
Well, the one that always gets me is the Climate Protection Act case.
Oh, really? Why is that? I mean, a law aimed at tackling climate change seems pretty straightforward, right?
You'd think so, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
But the BWRFG actually declared it partially unconstitutional.
Wait, what? Why?
Because it focused too much on short-term goals and didn't properly address emission reduction targets beyond 2030.
So basically, it's not enough to just say, we're cutting emissions.
Right.
You actually have to have a plan for the long haul.
Exactly, a plan that doesn't unfairly burden future generations.
So the BWRFG is like, hey, you can't just kick the can down the road. You need to deal with this now.
Precisely.
Wow, that's a pretty powerful statement about, our responsibility to future generations, isn't it?
It really is, and it sparked a lot of debate in Germany about how far those responsibilities extend.
I bet it did. Makes you think, what kind of world are we leaving behind for the next generation? Okay, let's shift gears a bit and talk about a case that's, well, a bit more ethically complex, shall we say. The business-like promotion of suicide law.
Ah, yes. That one is definitely a tough one. Touches on some really sensitive issues.
Yeah, I can imagine. So walk us through it. What was the law about?
It basically criminalized any organization that assisted someone in dying, even if the person was, terminally ill and suffering.
So even offering information or support to someone who wanted to end their life could land you in trouble.
That was the situation before the BWRFG got involved.
So what happened?
Well, they ended up striking down the law.
They did. Wow.
Yeah, they argued it was way too broad and violated an individual's right to self-determination.
Self-determination meaning?
Meaning the right to choose how and when they die.
I see. So the BWRFG is saying that even in these incredibly difficult situations, individuals should still have the right to make their own choices.
That's essentially the argument, yes.
But isn't that kind of a slippery slope, though? I mean, how do you balance that individual freedom with the need to protect vulnerable people who might be, pressured into ending their lives?
That's the heart of the dilemma, right. And the BWRFG acknowledged those concerns, but ultimately decided that this blanket ban went too far.
So what happened then? Did they offer any guidelines, for how assisted suicide should be handled?
They didn't create specific rules, no.
Okay.
But they did stress the importance of safeguards to prevent abuse.
So it sounds like they're trying to walk this really fine line between protecting individual freedom and preventing harm.
Exactly. It's a tough balance to strike.
Absolutely. Okay, let's move on to a case that, well, on the surface at least, sounds a bit more, shall we say, dry?
Which one are you thinking of?
The Valuation Act, the one dealing with property taxes.
Yes. Property taxes, the lifeblood of any government.
Right. So tell us, what's the constitutional drama hiding behind something as seemingly mundane as property valuations?
Believe it or not, it's all about fairness.
Fairness. How so?
Well, the case revolved around the fact that Germany was using property valuations from, get this, 1964 in some parts of the country.
1964, seriously. Property values must have changed drastically since then.
You're telling me. And the BVerfG agreed, arguing that this practice led to massive inequality in the system.
So people were being taxed unfairly based on these outdated valuations.
Exactly. People in areas where property values had skyrocketed were paying a much lower effective tax rate compared to those where values had stayed relatively the same.
So it wasn't just about the technicalities of valuations, it was about the very principle of equal treatment under the law.
Precisely. The BVerfG recognized that outdated valuations create an uneven playing field.
And they weren't having it.
Nope. They said everyone needs to be playing by the same rules.
That's a great example of how these seemingly boring legal issues can have a huge impact on people's lives.
It really does. And it raises questions that are relevant well beyond Germany, like how do we ensure our tax systems stay fair as economic conditions change?
It's a question a lot of countries are grappling with right now.
For sure. And it's clear the BVerfG isn't afraid to tackle these big systemic issues.
Not at all. It's fascinating how these cases can teach us so much about a country's values,
Right.
what they prioritize, what they hold dear.
Absolutely. It's like a window into their legal and societal DNA.
So we've just scratched the surface here with these 3 cases.
Oh, yeah, we've only just begun it.
There's so much more to unpack in the other 17 cases, and in our next segment, we're going to delve even deeper, looking for patterns, trends, and takeaways that connect these cases together.
We'll see what they reveal about the evolving relationship between the state and its citizens in Germany.
So stay tuned, folks, because we're just getting started.
The best is yet to come.
Welcome back to our deep dive, folks, where we're picking apart some fascinating cases in German constitutional law.
And, as we dig into these 20 cases, some really interesting patterns start to emerge, like threads connecting them all.
Oh, like what? I'm all ears.
Well, one of the big ones is this tension between security and individual rights, especially in our digital age.
Oh, yeah. That's a battle being fought everywhere these days. Governments wanting more data, more surveillance powers, all in the name of keeping us safe.
Exactly. But where do you draw the line?
Right. Where's that balance?
Well, with BVerfG, they've had to grapple with this question over and over again. Take the data retention laws, for example. The government wanted to store tons of communication data, essentially keeping tabs on who's talking to whom.
Sounds a bit Big Brother-ish.
Yeah, and the BVerfG basically said, nope, that's a huge invasion of privacy.
Really?
They struck down the law, argued it was way too broad, didn't have enough safeguards to protect people's privacy.
So they're saying even in the name of security, you can't just trample on people's fundamental rights.
Exactly. It's not a free-for-all.
Interesting. So is that a theme we see in other cases as well?
Absolutely. You see it in the case surrounding the Anti-Terrorism Database Act, too.
What was that about?
Well, this one allowed for the sharing of personal info between all sorts of security agencies.
Okay, so more data sharing.
Right. And again, the BVerfG stepped in, demanded tighter controls, emphasized that the fight against terrorism can't come at the cost of unchecked data collection.
So again, it's about finding that balance.
Right. Protecting the country without turning into a surveillance state.
Not an easy task, for sure.
Not at all. And it's not just about security either. Another trend we see is this focus on fairness and equality, especially when it comes to social welfare and tax systems.
We already touched on that with the property tax case, using those ancient valuations to determine people's taxes.
Exactly. And it wasn't just a one-off thing. The BVerfG has a history of stepping in when they see systemic inequality.
Like what?
Well, there's the Hertz IV case, for instance.
Hertz IV.
That's Germany's social security system for the unemployed.
Okay.
The BVerfG ruled that the sanctions imposed on folks who didn't comply with certain rules, they were too harsh.
Too harsh. Meaning
they didn't take into account individual circumstances and could push people further into poverty, which defeats the purpose of a safety net.
Right. So it's not just about having a safety net. It's about making sure that safety net is actually fair and doesn't punish people for being in a tough spot.
Exactly. It's about compassion and understanding within the system.
I like that. So the BVerfG is looking beyond the letter of the law, thinking about its real-world impact on people's lives.
They are. And this concern for fairness, it pops up in other areas too.
Like where?
Well, take the Stiefkind adoption case, for example.
Stiefkind adoption.
Yeah, it dealt with adoption rights for kids in non-marital families.
Ah, okay.
The court threw out discriminatory rules that made it harder for these families to adopt.
Wow.
They argued that all children deserve equal opportunities, regardless of their family structure.
That's a powerful statement.
It is, and it shows how they're using constitutional law to address these broader social issues.
Yeah, it's not just about abstract principles. It's about making sure the law actually works for people, on the ground.
Exactly, bringing those principles to life.
And, thinking about these trends, there's another one that comes to mind. It's maybe a bit less obvious, but just as important.
What are you thinking of?
It's about the process, like how laws are actually made.
Oh, you mean making sure the government is following the rules, dotting their I's and crossing their T's?
Exactly, like no cutting corners.
Right. Well, the BVRFG has struck down laws, not because of what they said, but because of how they were passed.
Really?
Yeah. They've intervened when they felt like the parliament didn't properly debate a law or when one branch of government overstepped its boundaries.
So they're not just protectors of individual rights, they're also protectors of the democratic process itself.
Precisely. They're making sure that system of checks and balances is working as intended.
Checks and balances, that's crucial, right?
Absolutely. And, there's actually a case where the BVRFG invalidated parts of several tax laws.
Why? What happened?
They felt like this committee, called the Vermittlungsausschuss, which is supposed to iron out differences between the two houses of parliament, well, they felt like this committee went too far.
So the BVRFG was like, hey, you can't just bypass the proper channels, even if you have good intentions.
That's essentially it. They're upholding the integrity of the process, which is so important for a healthy democracy.
Absolutely. And it's amazing how much we can learn about a country just by looking at the cases its highest court chooses to address.
It's true. Each case tells a story about the values that underpin their legal system.
It's like peeking behind the curtain, getting a glimpse into their legal DNA.
Exactly. Uncovering the principles that drive their decisions.
So we've talked about the trends, security versus rights, fairness and equality, the importance of process. But what about the impact of all these decisions? Like, does the BVRFG just issue a ruling and call it a day?
Oh, no, not at all. These rulings have real consequences.
In what way?
Well, the government is legally obligated to change or even completely repeal any law that's been deemed unconstitutional.
Like with the Climate Protection Act, they had to go back and come up with a new plan.
Exactly, one that addressed the court's concerns about, fairness for future generations.
And that new plan, it probably had a domino effect on other areas, right?
Oh, absolutely, like energy policy, infrastructure investments, the whole shebang.
So it's not just about words on paper. It's about creating actual tangible change.
Precisely, putting those words into action.
I like that. So it's not just symbolic, it's real.
It's real, and beyond those policy changes, these rulings also clarify how we understand fundamental rights.
Oh, interesting. How so?
Well, think about the assisted suicide case. The BVRFG didn't just legalize it outright.
Right.
They established a framework, guidelines for how the right to self-determination can be exercised in end-of-life situations, while also acknowledging the need to protect vulnerable folks.
So it's not just a yes or no. They're adding layers, nuances, setting precedents that guide future decisions on similar issues.
Exactly. They're shaping the legal landscape brick by brick.
It's really impressive to see a court take its role as a guardian of the Constitution so seriously.
It is. They're not afraid to make tough calls, even if it means going against popular opinion.
That's crucial, right?
Absolutely. It shows that even in a system where the majority rules, individual rights still matter, the rule of law still holds supreme.
That's a powerful reminder that democracy isn't just about winning elections. It's about making sure the system is fair for everyone.
It is. And that's a lesson we can all learn from no matter where we live.
Wow, you've given us a lot to think about today. I'm starting to see the world a little differently already.
My pleasure. It's been a great conversation.
It has. And you mentioned a final thought before we started the segment, something that ties it all together.
I did, and I think it's something that resonates with all of us, no matter our background.
Well, don't keep us in suspense. Let's hear it.
All right, ready for that final thought?
Oh, absolutely. Lay it on us.
Okay, well, as we've seen, right, the BVRFG's whole role is about balance.
Balance, right?
Yeah, balancing individual rights with the needs of the state, balancing security with freedom, progress with tradition. It's a constant juggling act.
It really is.
But here's the thing. That balancing act, it's never really over.
What do you mean?
It's an ongoing process, a constant negotiation. As society changes, so do the challenges.
So it's like a pendulum always swinging back and forth.
Exactly. And as technology, keeps advancing, social norms shift, new challenges pop up, and we have to reevaluate that balance.
Oh, I see where you're going with this. You're making me a little nervous here. Like, what kind of future challenges are we talking about?
Well, think about AI. Artificial intelligence.
AI, yeah.
It's already everywhere, right? Recommending what we buy, helping doctors. But what happens when AI starts making decisions that have a huge impact on our fundamental rights?
You were talking about, like, AI being used in law enforcement, the justice system, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Imagine an algorithm that predicts who's likely to commit a crime or decides someone's sentence based on their past. That's some serious power.
It is. And how do we even begin to ensure those systems are fair, unbiased? How do we protect individual rights when machines are calling the shots?
That's the million-dollar question, right? It's like opening a Pandora's box. AI has this potential to solve so many problems, but it also introduces a whole new set of dilemmas.
And who's going to navigate all that?
Well, that's where institutions like the BVRFG come in, those guardians of the Constitution. They'll have to figure out how to reconcile these advancements with our fundamental rights.
So all these cases we've talked about today, as complex as they are, they're just a taste of what's to come.
They are. They're a glimpse into the future of legal battles we'll be facing.
And that's why it's so important for us to stay engaged, to ask questions, to hold our leaders accountable, right?
Absolutely. We can't just sit back and let things happen. We need to be informed, be active participants in shaping the future.
Wow. This deep dive has been a real eye-opener. You've given us a lot to chew on.
It's been my pleasure. Really enjoyed this conversation.
Me too. And on that note, I think we've reached the end of our exploration of German constitutional law, folks.
Time flies when you're having fun.
It really does, but we hope you found it as insightful and thought-provoking as we did.
We hope you learned a thing or two.
Remember, the fight for justice, the protection of individual rights, it's a marathon, not a sprint. It's an ongoing journey.
A journey we're all on together.
So stay curious, stay informed, keep asking those tough questions because the future of our democracies depends on it.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Until next time, folks, happy diving.